Thank you for inviting New Mexico to speak on how drought has affected our state. New Mexico is an arid to semi-arid state. It's the fifth driest based on statewide precipitation averages. Therefore, we have limited water supplies. Even though New Mexico had a really good 22 monsoon season, we are still dealing with drought conditions in the majority of the state. My name is Jerri Valdez, and I am the Water Use and Conservation Bureau Chief. And with me today is Jerri Pohl, Supervisor for Statewide Projects, and Andrew Erdmann, the State Water Planner. In today's presentation, Andrew, Jerri, and I would like to briefly discuss New Mexico's drought toolbox. I would like to give you a brief overview of the current drought conditions in New Mexico. The map shown on this slide is from the U.S. Drought Monitor, and it reflects the drought conditions from January 24th. The maps are updated every Tuesday and released to the public on Thursdays. As of today, 82% of the state is in D1 to D4, with 4% being in D3, D4. The monsoon season this summer brought relief to New Mexico's drought. As you can see from this slide, the majority of the state is still experiencing some type of drought. Using a timeline from the U.S. Drought Monitor, we can compare the current drought to that of the past 20 years. We can see that D4, which is this dark maroon, almost brown color, pops up in 2002, 2004, 2006, 2011, 2013, 2018, and again in 2020. The slide from climate.gov is interesting because it illustrates over time how temperatures in the United States have become much warmer. This slide illustrates reservoir storage across the state. All reservoirs are well below average and below last year's storage volume. New Mexico's largest reservoir, Elephant Butte, is at 5% capacity, while New Mexico's second largest reservoir, Navajo Lake, is at 51% capacity. Climate forecasters are predicting that the drought in New Mexico will likely persist and intensify. Therefore, water preservation is important. By making conservation a way of life in New Mexico, we save water, rebuild our aquifers, we are prepared for the uncertainties of climate change, and we minimize the harmful effects of drought. To help preserve water, the New Mexico Office of the State Engineer developed tools designed towards the wise use of water for a health conservation landscape. In 2019, our office published the New Mexico's Enchanted Xeriscape Guidebook. The guidebook provides all the information needed to create a beautiful xeriscape garden. The New Mexico Plant List and Plant App are expert recommended list of low water use, native or adapted plants that thrive in New Mexico's climate. New Mexico's landscape irrigation calculator works like a smart controller, applying the right amount of water based on information about site conditions such as evapotranspiration, soil type, plant type, and microclimates. The smart calculator uses 24 years of historical weather data to estimate water needs on any given day of the year. The weather data is used to calculate average, daily, and historic evapotranspiration rates. The New Mexico Landscape Irrigation Calculator provides a personalized irrigation calendar with watering times by zone, run times, and number of cycles. Rooftop rainwater harvesting along with outdoor water conservation can reduce the demands on municipal water supplies and our aquifers. Rainwater is the best source of water for plants because it is free of salts and other minerals that can be harmful to the roots. Active water resource management is the state engineer's critical management initiative to address continuing drought, increase variability in water supplies, and increase demand for water. The state engineer has AWRM tools to actively manage real-time distribution of water to prevent waste and ensure that water right owners do not exceed their legal right, implement priority administration of water rights in times of shortages, and ensure New Mexico continues compliance with interstate obligations. These comprehensive set of tools allow the Office of the State Engineer to effectively manage water resources, protect senior water rights, and meet interstate stream delivery obligations. I will hand it over to Andrew now for the 50-year planning.
Okay, thanks, Julie. My name's Andrew Erdmann. I'm the State Water Planner. I'm with the Interstate Stream Commission, and I've got a few slides here to talk about kind of what we're expecting for the future of water availability in New Mexico and how we're planning for that. Okay, so first, we're starting with 50-year water planning. That's the state's new initiative to really look forward and use our water planning processes to prepare for different conditions than we have today. 50-year water planning is a governor's initiative, which is really designed to help New Mexico plan for climate change impacts to water supply, and it's intended, the plan itself is designed for decision makers and the general public so that we can get across some information about changes we're expecting. I have a little bit on here about what this water plan is not, because we've done several other water planning efforts in the past, and it can be a little confusing. This is not the state water plan. New Mexico continues to do state water plans every 5 years. Those are largely a reporting tool to talk about work that's being done in the state or has been done in the past 5 years. It is not regional water plans, which were last updated in 2017. It's not a technical report. It's pretty short. We're shooting for 30 pages. We're closer to 80, but It's not full of tables. It's not all gloom and doom, although it is substantially that. But there's a lot in there that's identifying projects and ways that we can go forward. It's not going to solve all the state's problems. So the intent here is to look 50 years out and design problems that we can tackle in the next few years based on those conditions. It's not to lay out the next 50 years of what has to be done. And it's not going to just sit on a shelf. It's got just a couple years worth of information in there, and it's going to keep getting updated regularly. So this, of course, is something we couldn't develop on our own. Calling myself the state water planner is a little grandiose. I have one teammate. We have a pretty small state water planning program. And so a lot of this work and the work that we're trying to continue to do is done through partnerships. And this is not by any means a comprehensive list, but a lot of the big partners that we've been working with. Speaking of that science, what you're looking at here is a graph that shows temperature trends and precipitation trends. So the red line at the top is temperature. The individual dots are individual years, and the horizontal lines are 10-year averages. So if you look at this, you can see that we're basically starting to see temperatures increasing over the past couple of decades. Maybe the 70s was particularly cold, so it's hard to know if that starts in the 70s or 80s, but certainly there's a trend of generally increasing temperatures over the last 40 or 50 years. The lower line in blue for precipitation works the same way. So individual years in dots and then 10-year averages in horizontal lines. One thing here is that there's a huge amount of variability between a wet year and a dry year, and that's expected to become more extreme of a difference. But in general, we're expecting precipitation to continue in its highly variable way. The main concern is that we'll be spreading that same amount of precipitation. I think Julie said fifth driest in the nation across a longer summer and a hotter year. So that's going to increase the demand for landscape use and increase evaporation rates for water in general. So this is a slide that shows anticipated increases in temperature. The entire state is expecting to go up at least 5 degrees rise in temperature, and that's going to affect the whole state. The other thing that you can't quite see in this slide is that this is part of a big regional process. This isn't uniquely affecting New Mexico. I know this is a multi-state audience, so I'm sure folks in their own states are looking at similar maps and trying to figure out how to deal with this. But this is what we're facing just here in our state. Again, here looking at New Mexico, we're looking at an increase in aridification. So the map on the top left is the historical period, 50-year period ending in 2020. Essentially, the red areas are more arid, and the redder it is, the more arid it is. The final map, the one that's all red, that's showing in general what we're expecting for changes. And as you can see, basically the white areas are the only areas we're not expecting change. So this one is to show that New Mexico is not alone in this, and of course that includes Mexico to the south. What we're looking at here is change in water stress. So areas that are getting more blue are expected to experience more water, basically, and brown is going to be less so, more water stress. Again, one of the big takeaways here is that we're not alone in New Mexico. Another one is that there's essentially no white space on this map at all. Every place is looking at having changes in terms of how water is experienced. It also really illustrates the fact that we can't just hop over the border and import some water. One of the real common solutions we hear from people when we say that we're going to have a shortage of water is, well, let's get some more water, which is pretty reasonable place to look next. But when you look at this in terms of just bringing in new water from over state lines, you have to go pretty far to get to an area that has water. And for anyone who was paying attention this last year, I guess at this point, there was even the Mississippi was looking at areas where it was totally dried out. So importing water is not only politically incredibly difficult and geographically and engineering wise, but also the need is huge. So if you were really to start moving water around, there's more country with water stress than without it. So this is a long list. These are generally what we're expecting to see in terms of climate change impacts in New Mexico. An average temperature rise of 5 to 7 degrees, lower stream flow and lower aquifer recharge as a result, greater variability in precipitations, hotter and more severe droughts, decreasing snowpack with earlier and diminishing runoff, greater demands on dwindling groundwater due to surface water shortfalls, stress on natural vegetation caused by increasing temperatures and decreased water availability, and will change. There'll be some kind of change in regime of what kind of vegetation we're looking at. Increasing catastrophic forest fire frequency, increasing flooding and sediment transport in a way that irreversible damage to soils through loss of vegetation and erosion, and degraded quality of surface water. We tried to put it on this really nice background because it's a pretty gloomy list. So here's what we're trying to do about this. And I only have a little bit of information to share at this point because we haven't quite been able to release our 50-year water plan. But as we pulled it together, here's what we found. We did a very detailed look at lots of different sectors of use to look at what factors added to more resilience. And one of the things we found is that those factors generally were the same for all of the sectors of use. So after carefully looking at this across different sectors, we basically put the data back together. And we have these 5 areas that we're saying are really essential to water resilience. So one is diversity, one is demand management, watershed health, infrastructure capacity, whether the infrastructure is physically capable of delivering all the water that's needed and has some redundancy built in, and water availabilities. Okay, so here's how we're trying to tackle our 50-year water plan. Stewardship, sustainability, and equity are really the 3 pillars we're trying to build around. And those were identified by the governor in her call to create this plan back when she initially ran for office at the beginning of her first term, and she's now just beginning her second. So these 3 concepts, sustainability, stewardship, and equity, they're not mutually exclusive. There's a lot of overlap between these. Equity in particular is really a principle that we can kind of bring to lots of projects. And then finally, continued research and planning. So trying to make sure this is a living process and we continue to do a better job refining our plans and goals as we get new science and information. Thank you very much. I'm going to hand it over to Jerri.
Thank you, Andrew. I just want to speak a little bit on desalination and produced water. Desalination is the oldest tool that New Mexico has in the drought toolbox, as we've always had a large underground brackish water supply. But going forward, it's likely to be implemented more and more. In 1958, the Office of Saline Water selected Roswell as one of 3 cities in the nation to build distillation plants in an effort to settle the Great Southwest. Salinity and drought have saturated our headlines, and policymakers at all levels grapple with how to adapt to the ever-changing environment. Researchers continue to develop crops that are adapted to the increasing temperatures and that use less water. Studies also find increasing salinity is not good for our cash crop here, which is our green chili, but it's also affecting our southern vineyards that have existed since the 1500s. We have implemented crop fallowing programs on the Pecos and Rio Grande to stretch the supply even further. And drought also brings along the risk of fire and the water quality issues that are associated with the post-runoff that further exacerbate the problem. This is a generalized map showing all of the brackish saline aquifers in the state. And oddly enough, the more saline water is found at shallower depths. And in some basins, we observe an almost exponential decrease in dissolved solids at greater depths. The EPA, in response to national water stress, released the Water Reuse Action Plan in 2020, and it is regarding fit-for-purpose treatment and reuse of wastewater in these 5 major categories. New Mexico is already implementing these along with brackish and saline water treatment. However, all of these require desalination and concentrate management. In 2021, New Mexico stood alone as a national example of accomplishments towards water security, water sustainability, and water resilience. And in 2022, again, New Mexico stood out as successfully rolling out the New Mexico Produced Water Data Portal, giving the public access to information on wells, water quality, and produced water volumes. Produced water, this is the newest potential tool to help us deal with the effects of drought and aridification. With the passing of the 2019 Produced Water Act, New Mexico now has the potential to decide whether we will have rules to use the produced water outside of the oil and gas sector. How much water are we talking about? And the chart on the right-hand side comes from the Groundwater Protection Council. In 2007, New Mexico volume was reported in excess of 665 million barrels, and that barrel is a blue barrel, which is 42 gallons. In 2012, that increased to 775 million. In 2017, it increased again to over 879 million. And again in 2021, it doubled to 1.6 billion barrels. And yes, that is billion with a B. So there are risks to the current favored method of disposal of produced water, which is saltwater injection. Seismic activity nearly weekly. We're getting reports of more earthquakes in the Permian Basin. We've had sinkholes and collapses, pollution and transport, increased road traffic, which increases the road damage, and inadequate roads, which are causing accidents. And we've just recently been informed that injection is becoming more difficult as our pore space is diminishing. We would like to close by saying that all water has value. And thank you for asking New Mexico to give our perspective on what drought means to New Mexico. And again, here's our contact information, and please reach out and contact us if you have any questions.